She said it at the kitchen counter while scrolling on her phone, not looking up, not lowering her voice. She said I was touching her too much, that it felt like pressure, that she needed space. Then she added one clean sentence that landed harder than the rest. She wanted me to touch her less. I nodded. I stepped back. Literally. I took my hands off the counter and put them in my pockets like I'd been corrected in public. At work that day, my team sat around a glass table while she led a training session 2 floors above me. I could see her through the open atrium, standing straight, confident, laughing at something a younger guy said. He leaned in when she spoke. She didn't move away. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. Dinner was already done. She ate fast, answered messages between bites, stood up before I finished. When I reached for her wrist out of habit, I stopped myself halfway. She noticed. She didn't comment. She just kept walking. Later, she sat on the couch with her laptop balanced on her knees. I sat at the other end, hands folded, eyes on the muted TV. She crossed her legs toward the door. Before bed, she reminded me she had an early meeting. She said it casually, like a shield. I stayed on my side of the bed. No goodnight kiss. No argument. No misunderstanding to fix. She set a boundary. I respected it completely. She fell asleep quickly. I stayed awake long enough to make sure I wouldn't forget what she asked for. The next day, I stopped doing things I'd always done without thinking. I didn't text her good morning. I didn't ask how her meetings went. When she walked past me in the hallway that connected our departments, I nodded once and kept moving. Around lunch, I overheard 2 coworkers talking near the elevators. They weren't whispering. One of them mentioned her name, then lowered his voice too late. They talked about how she'd been staying late lately, how a junior analyst from her team kept getting pulled into one-on-one feedback sessions. They laughed in that careful way people do when they don't want trouble. I didn't turn around. I didn't react. I just memorized the name. That evening, she came home energized. Not happy. Energized. She talked about a presentation that went well, about how exhausting it was to manage people who needed constant reassurance. She said it while standing, coat still on, phone lighting up every few seconds. I listened from the table. When she finally noticed I wasn't responding, she asked if something was wrong. I told her no. I told her I was giving her what she asked for. She paused, studied me for a second, then smiled like it was resolved. She went to shower with her phone. I heard it vibrate against the counter once, then again. Later, I folded my laundry alone. I moved my things to the guest room closet without making it obvious. I set my alarm earlier. I updated a spreadsheet I hadn't touched in months. She came to bed without checking where I was. I didn't correct her. That night, she slept deeply. I didn't. By the 3rd day, the pattern stopped pretending to be subtle. Her calendar stayed open on the shared tablet she used for grocery lists and workout reminders. Blocks labeled check-in appeared after hours, always tied to the same name. A junior analyst. Fresh hire. Someone I'd seen trailing behind her during all-hands meetings, carrying her laptop like it mattered. I didn't screenshot anything. I didn't need to. I just watched the blocks multiply. At work, I pulled internal reports the way I always did, calm and methodical. Expense approvals. Overtime logs. Performance reviews submitted faster than protocol allowed. His name kept surfacing where it statistically shouldn't. I didn't flag it. I archived it. That evening, she said she'd be late again. She said it lightly, like it was weather. I nodded without looking up. I was cooking for one now, even when she was technically home. When she walked past me to change, she brushed my shoulder on purpose, testing something. I stayed still. No reaction. No reach. She paused, then kept moving. Later, a notification lit up her phone on the counter while she showered. A message preview flashed long enough to show a thank you, followed by a sentence that didn't belong in a professional exchange. I turned the phone face down without unlocking it. That night, I moved the last of my things quietly. Chargers. A spare jacket. Documents I'd kept untouched for years. I didn't slam drawers. I didn't sigh. She came out of the shower relaxed, humming, wrapped in steam and confidence. She noticed the space beside her was empty. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. I didn't vanish. I just stopped occupying the spaces she expected me to fill. In the morning, I left before she woke up. I didn't announce it. I didn't text from the elevator like I used to. At work, I changed my lunch schedule and booked a quiet conference room instead of eating at my desk. When she passed through my floor with her team, I was already gone. That evening, I came home later than usual. I went straight to the guest room, closed the door, and worked with headphones on. When she knocked once, lightly, I didn't open it right away. By the time I did, her expression had shifted from casual to confused. She said she thought we should talk. She said it like a check-in, not a plea. I told her I was busy and asked if it could wait. I kept my voice even. Polite. Distant. She stood there a moment longer than necessary, then nodded and walked away. Over the next few days, I adjusted everything. I canceled shared subscriptions. I cooked simple meals and cleaned only my own dishes. I stopped syncing calendars. I stopped asking questions that gave her room to perform answers. She started hovering in doorways. She lingered when I passed. Once, she reached for my arm while talking, then stopped herself, like she remembered her own rule. At night, I could hear her pacing in the living room while I read in the other room. Door closed, light on. She'd asked for less. I gave her absence without drama, without anger, without explanation. And for the first time, she didn't know where she stood with me. That seemed to bother her more than anything else. The shift didn't come from me. It came from outside her control. At work, the junior analyst stopped staying late. His desk light went dark at a normal hour. His name disappeared from the after-hours calendar blocks she'd stopped leaving open. People noticed before she did. That's how it always works. I heard about it from someone in finance while waiting for coffee. Not gossip. Observation. The kind that travels without effort. Apparently, compliance had started asking quiet questions. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to change behavior. That night, she came home irritated instead of energized. Her movements were sharp. She talked about how exhausting it was to manage people who misunderstood boundaries. She said it while watching me, like she expected a reaction. I gave her none. Later, she sat closer than usual on the couch, knees angled toward me, voice softer. She mentioned how distant I'd become. She said it carefully, as if testing language. I told her I was respecting her request. I told her I thought space was important. She didn't like hearing her own words returned without emotion. Over the next few days, she started adjusting. She cooked again. She asked about my schedule. She laughed a little too loudly at things that weren't funny. Once, she brushed past me in the hallway and let her hand linger, waiting. I stepped aside. The house grew quiet in a new way. Not tense. Unbalanced. She had lost the rhythm. At work, at home, in places where she used to dictate distance, she was now guessing. I didn't change my pace. I didn't rush. I just kept moving forward, leaving her slightly behind, watching the space widen without knowing how to close it. The first crack showed up at a dinner she hadn't planned to be defensive at. It was a small gathering with colleagues and a couple of friends from outside work. Neutral ground. She moved through the room like she always did, composed, attentive, in control. I stayed near the edge, present but not attached to her orbit. Someone asked how things were going at the office. A harmless question. She started answering automatically, then stopped when another woman mentioned how quiet her department had become lately. The junior analyst's name came up, not directly, just enough to hang in the air. She laughed it off too quickly. A pause followed. Not awkward, just observant. People noticed her tone shift, her posture tighten. She glanced at me once, expecting backup, a familiar anchor. I was refilling my glass. Later, one of her friends pulled her aside. I didn't hear what was said, but I saw the result. Her smile lost its precision. She kept scanning the room, recalculating. On the drive home, she talked more than usual. She mentioned how people misunderstood dynamics, how rumors form when boundaries aren't respected. She waited for agreement. I kept my eyes on the road and my voice level. I said nothing that added or corrected. At home, she hovered in the kitchen while I put things away. She asked if I thought people were being unfair. I told her I didn't think much about other people's interpretations. That answer landed heavier than an argument would have. For the first time, her social confidence didn't protect her. The room hadn't turned against her. It had simply stopped leaning in. And she felt it. The house started feeling larger to her as I became smaller inside it. She began waiting up for me again, sitting on the couch with nothing on, phone dark, like she wanted to prove availability without asking for it. I passed through the room with a nod, grabbed water, went back to the guest room. I didn't rush. I didn't linger. At work, she adjusted her schedule twice in 1 week. Suddenly, her meetings overlapped with my breaks. She started walking past my floor again, slower than necessary, scanning for me through the glass. When our eyes met once, I held the look for half a second, then returned to my screen. That was new. That unsettled her. She tried language next. Not apologies. Reframing. She mentioned how stressed she'd been lately, how disconnected everything felt. She talked about us like it was a shared issue, not a fracture she'd initiated. I listened without stepping closer. One evening, she cooked my favorite meal. She set the table for two, candles included, like a memory reenacted out of sequence. When I sat down, I stayed polite. I thanked her. I ate. I cleared my plate and stood up when I was done. She stayed seated. Later, I heard her crying quietly in the bedroom. Not loudly. Controlled. The kind meant to be discovered. I closed my door and turned on the light. By the end of the week, she stopped sleeping well. She asked if I was still attracted to her. She asked if I was planning something. I told her I was exactly where she asked me to be. She realized then that distance, once respected, doesn't always reverse on command. She stopped trying to manage the situation quietly and tried to face it head on. One evening, she waited for me in the hallway instead of the living room. Not sitting, standing, blocking nothing, but present enough that passing without acknowledgement would have been impossible. I slowed, not out of hesitation, but precision. She said we needed to talk. Not casually this time. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She asked what was happening to us, why I felt so far away, when exactly things had shifted. I told her nothing had shifted. I told her I was still doing exactly what she asked. She took a step closer, then stopped, remembering the boundary she'd drawn herself. That pause said more than any argument could have. She searched my face for something familiar and didn't find it. She mentioned missing me. Not emotionally. Practically. She talked about how quiet the house felt, how strange it was not knowing what I was thinking. She asked if there was someone else. I shook my head. Calm. Certain. That seemed to unsettle her more than confirmation would have. She tried reaching for my hand and caught herself mid-motion, fingers closing on air. The moment stretched, awkward, and exposed. I waited it out without rescuing her from it. She asked if I still cared. I told her I cared enough to respect her limits without negotiating them. That was when her expression finally cracked. Not dramatic, just stripped of authority. She realized this wasn't a phase or a tactic. I hadn't pulled away to provoke her. I had stepped out of reach, and I wasn't circling back. Her world started shrinking in places she used to dominate. At work, she came home quiet more often. Not tired. Contained. The kind of quiet that comes from watching authority slip without a clear moment to point to. Her phone stopped lighting up the way it used to. She checked it anyway, over and over, like muscle memory. The junior analyst transferred teams. Officially, it was about growth. Unofficially, it ended whatever leverage she thought she had. She didn't talk about it. She didn't need to. The absence followed her home. Friends stopped calling as much. Invitations softened into vague suggestions that never turned into plans. When people did reach out, the conversation stayed on the surface. Polite, brief, observant. At home, she tried filling the silence with motion. Rearranging shelves. Starting projects she didn't finish. Cleaning things that were already clean. She hovered near me without asking for anything, like proximity alone might restore balance. It didn't. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the floor of the bedroom, back against the bed, shoes still on. She looked up when I entered, eyes red but dry. No performance left, just exposure. She said she felt like everything was slipping at once. Work, friends, us. She said she didn't recognize how things got this far. I listened from the doorway. She waited for reassurance. For context. For blame. I gave her none of it. I went to the guest room and closed the door like I had every night before. Behind it, she stayed where she was, finally alone with the consequences she'd never expected to face without me cushioning the fall. The last moment didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with clarity. The next morning, she stood in the kitchen while I packed my bag for work. Not blocking the doorway. Not pleading. Just watching with the kind of focus people use when they realize something irreversible is happening. She said she never thought I would actually disappear like this. She said she assumed space meant temporary, adjustable, that I would eventually reach back across it. I zipped the bag and put it over my shoulder. She asked if I was leaving. I told her no. I told her I had already left. This was just logistics catching up. She tried once more to step closer, then stopped herself, respecting the boundary she'd taught me so well. That detail landed harder than anything else. She looked smaller there, not defeated, just finally outside the center of control. At the door, she asked what she was supposed to do now. I turned, calm enough to be unmistakable. I told her nothing was being done to her. I told her she had asked for less, and I had taken her seriously. Completely. No questions. No pressure. I opened the door. She stayed in the kitchen, silent, holding a space that no longer responded to her presence. As I walked out, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, detached, precisely where I chose to be. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And this time, I didn't look back to see if she was ready for the result. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.